Thank you, Chris. There are a couple of themes that I'm picking up on. One is competition, the power of competition and how that motivates people. Another one is empowerment. You know, what do we do and how do we empower others? That seems to be coming through quite a bit. However, talk about going granular. That was fantastic. Really, really step by step. And we had talked about how important having a methodical process is, which is easy to say, but to see what that process looks like was very powerful. Tools that track your progress, also key, we had talked about, and some rigor required, and I believe that's an understatement, but hopefully some usable templates that you can take with you. Again, today is not just about talking, but action, so thank you for that. Now, more talking. I'd like to introduce our panel members, and as I do that, I will ask if we could have the other chairs put up on the podium. And as that is happening, I will say that we are talking to our panel, and our panelists are gathering themselves and making their way up to the podium, about what is next for open data. Now that sounds like a very simple question, and yet, it's so large. So I would love to hear, and I'm sure you would too, what they have to say. We have 4 members, and I will ask the first one to come up and introduce her as she takes her seat. This is Emma Naji, the Executive Director of the AI Forum. She, too, is on the front lines, as a few of the other members are, with a plate that is sort of overflowing about seeing the potential of AI through. What good can come out of it? So I have members over here. We have Suzanne Snively, and she is with Transparency International, New Zealand, very involved with open government partnership work, again on the front lines. We have Keitha Booth. She is, I'm sure many of you know her, former director of the Open Government Information and Data Program, responsible for helping cement the foundations of New Zealand's progress in this space. She is now writing, by the way, the independent report on New Zealand's performance against the Open Government Partnership National Action Plan. So doing a lot of oversight right now. And then Evelyn. We have Evelyn Wareham, Chief Data and Insights Officer at the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. Her plate, too, is overflowing with responsibility for data, including both companies and contracting data. Now, I have introduced you. I will not quiz you, so you remember who's who, but through the questions and answers, hopefully you will remember. But I will start with Suzanne, because you're the first question on my list here. We talked last week about a phrase you mentioned, benign neglect of the resource that data is. In face of all the perceived exigencies and all the perceived sort of priorities out there, there is a danger, isn't there, in undervaluing this data. So what do you want to see the New Zealand government do better when it comes to using and leveraging this undervalued resource?
Amazing. Your 3 speakers have just exemplified, I think, so clearly what you can do when you don't have benign neglect.
I'm going to just pause. Are we the green one? Just hold it straight up to your mouth.
The 3 speakers, I think, exemplified expertly what we could have if we didn't have benign neglect. Imagine if we had a similar approach to data that we saw for Chris, for Waikato, for New Zealand Inc. The difference it could make to us in terms of our overall growth and prosperity is really quite significant. One of the things that makes us unique, I think, other countries, is that a lot of the data sources we have, the administrative data sources we have, are virtually census. And if we could find ways to use those more effectively, the information that we have about behavior, about where it is that we can leverage additional growth, additional housing, that would make a huge difference to us. Even though we're a small, isolated, distant country, we'd be able to use our own internal resources a lot more effectively.
Yeah. We were talking, and sorry about the fuzziness on the microphone, but we were talking earlier about the New Zealand's potential to be a world bank of data with almost complete data sets. And Suzanne, as an economist, has been for 50 years. So I love the terminology there.
We have got so much information and so much knowledge about ourselves compared to other places that we could be what I call world bank of data. And by the way, when I say that, I think we could lead the way, because I think other countries are also recognizing that these days it's not money which makes the world go round, it's actually information. And by the way, I just want to quickly add, and I'm sure I don't need to this crowd, that I don't really mean World Bank of data, I mean World Bank of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Because as you know, data itself is a very granular bit of whatever it is. It's the combination of data and openness which is key. That really brings me to the other point, as Carlos has emphasized. New Zealand has a really great ranking on the Corruption Perception Index. It says that compared to other countries, we already have an openness and an accountability. As we all know, there's a way to go. It's not perfect, but we do have it here. So if we take the knowledge that we've got and we look at the openness that's possible for this economy, we have got a resource which our benign neglect at the moment is really leaving us behind where we could be.
Okay, thank you. Open data, open potential. I think you just said it. I'm going to turn next to Keitha, who's next to you. And Keitha has such a unique perspective on this. She shared with me that her first job was working as a librarian in the General Assembly Library, making sure that government publications were available and easily accessed. So she has been in this space for quite a long time and has never stopped trying to make data used by government more available to the public. So Keitha, in all this time that you've been working in this space, what would you have expected to see by now?
Well, back then, at the Parliamentary Library, government publications were very hard to find, and there wasn't a lot of interest in making them more readily available. I had hoped that government would make all of its information available in a single source in some way, and that hasn't happened.
What has happened that you have been encouraged by?
Right.
Small question.
Well, let's just look internationally first. The OECD ratings, which we've heard about, and congratulations to Colombia, they really give us some really good advice for what we can do next. And the other top countries are France and South Korea. And the OECD has said that they and Colombia have some similar factors, and they are that the programs, particularly I'm talking about open data, not the wider information, the programs are either sitting in a central agency which leads public sector reform, or they're in a line ministry which has digital agenda responsibility. And here in New Zealand, our program is currently not in either of those. It's not to minimise the work that Stats New Zealand has done, of course, I think that's government services is the chief focus doing. But OECD say, if you're close to the centre of the digital agenda, there's a much better chance of success.
Can you just say those last words once again? if you're much closer to the
centre of government, so therefore the centre in this case being State Services Commission, the Treasury, or the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, or Internal Affairs, which leads the digital strategy.
Thank you. We got a little overwhelmed there, and I heard some amens out there in the audience. So, okay, thank you so much. And now I would like to turn to Evelyn, who is next to you. Your interest in data dates back to ancient data, she told me, from her background in history and working with the archives, to looking 500 years ahead at what our children and grandchildren will have access to. So right now you're working very hard to drive change from within a huge and diverse source of data within MB. What is the biggest challenge in that drive, in trying to drive that?
So we're driving a program across MB that's about achieving data readiness in order to become an evidence and insights-led organisation. So I guess by choosing that goal of data readiness, you can hear, we know we've got a way to go. We're large, 4,000 staff, diverse, 15 different regulatory systems to think about, around the same number of ministers. So for us, it's how we bring together the different components of MB, which are essentially embedded in our data, so that we can realise the potential of having those functions together. So we've identified 5 key focus areas that we've been looking at over the last year. The first and foremost of those is leadership and culture. So shifting our culture as an agency so that we treat our data as a strategic asset rather than a byproduct of our processes, and getting a leadership commitment to really driving value from that data. The other four are raising visibility. We know we've got a huge quantity of data, but even within MB, it can be pretty hard to find, let alone if you're one of our data users trying to surf our 150 different websites to find things. I know, crazy number, huh? We're focused on growing our own capability and our tools, consolidating our data warehouse platform, so on, so that we've got a robust engine on enabling trusted data sharing, both within agency and within MB and across agencies, and improving data quality. So quite a cluster of different work to get to data readiness. Open data, in some ways, is icing on the cake. Even though it should come really early on, we need to have those different planks well established so that we can continue to do open data well.
Okay. So you said 5, leadership, visibility, the last 3?
Sorry,
briefly?
leadership and culture,
Yep.
visibility, capability, data sharing, and quality.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you. I was counting. And then if you don't mind, Keitha, passing your microphone down to Emma. Emma, you are working hard to change the AI forum, as you said, from a think tank to a do tank, which I particularly liked, to provide what you describe as relatable use cases that can inspire to look to AI, or inspire us rather, to look to AI as beneficial, safe and mindful, ethical, inclusive, and transparent. But we have also talked about the fear factor. You know, fear of AI sells newspapers and drives Hollywood plots. So what's not getting out about the positive side of AI?
I think what's happened here particularly is we've looked to global examples. So what's not getting out is what's relatable to New Zealand, and a big part of the problem with that is it's therefore what's achievable. What do we feel is achievable? And I think that's one of the missing links is understanding that we can do this within our teams and within our organisations, and we can learn and learn together and experiment and grow that. But where we've seen bleeding edge examples or extreme examples of AI, which, although they don't feed into necessarily the same fears, it's still such a distance away from what people feel they can do within their teams. Yeah.
Okay. Now, is there any pushback against the fear of privacy and ethical oversteps?
I've not experienced that personally myself. I think it's and this is going to be controversial, but I think it's an easy excuse because I think the state of data and the work to get to readiness before you're even considering, ways in which you're going to communicate that data, it's so much to get through. It's almost, I'm concerned that people are jumping those guns and stopping themselves before they've even got through the scale of getting data ready to be able to, then have to deal with those kind of concerns and issues. So no, I haven't, not in that sense. I think we're too early almost in some areas.
Okay. Also, I just want to point out, because Emma mentioned it to me earlier, there's a new digital council. How many in this room have heard about this? Okay, maybe 2/3. But if you could just briefly tell us what that is, because part of the problem here is we're not learning about what's out there and who's doing what in what space. And this has just come online, correct?
It was announced last week, yep. So Digital Council is an advisory group of people to advise government on how to get the most out of digital technologies, essentially. So a group of diverse people with different experiences. This year their theme is trust, so how to build and increase trust with digital technologies, things like social license, which I think everyone in this room probably understands very well. The idea is that this group of people can replace the notorious CTO role that didn't quite get fixed, and the idea being that a group of people from different backgrounds and different experiences will give a fuller perspective and experience. Yeah.
Thank you.
Could you clarify how it relates to the DDMAD, the Digital Economy, Digital Inclusion Ministerial Advisory Group?
I'm not part of the Digital Council, so I will have to decline to answer, I'm afraid.
But if somebody knows that, I'd be really interested.
Is anybody able to answer that? Oh, you.
Digi Med no longer exists.
Okay, it no longer exists, just for clarification, in case you didn't hear. Suzanne, I will turn to you right next, because one of the things that I asked them is, if you could wave a magic wand question, what would you change? And what would be your call to action to the people in the room? And so we talked about a couple of things, and the potential, again, with such a small economy, the cycles of innovation could be so fast, and there's so much more that could be done. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you like to see done, and what call to action do you have to share with this audience today?
Well, for start, I'd like us to progress the whole idea of open data. I'd like to see everyone go away today and progress what we've been discussing. We've had such amazing examples. There would be clearly, I would think there'd be everybody in this room will have in their mind 2 or 3 things they could go away and do today following this session. And if everyone in this room did so, we'd have a network and we'd be able to kind of move things forward. In my view, we can't afford to wait. We started talking about open data years ago. Keitha talks about the Parliamentary Library, but there have been specific programs thinking about open data, and we just keep starting and stopping. And in the meantime, what worries me the most, I guess, about this is that some unscrupulous forces are actually getting information about us which will shape our behavior for us in nefarious and I think, unfortunate ways. So it's not simply a case that we need the open data because we can do really positive and progressive things, but we also need to be working on it as soon as possible to protect what we've got. Now let me just give an example of what I mean by that. When you think of money, you think of it as a medium of an exchange, and you can actually visualize a dollar bill or $50 note or $100 note. I've been on the Health Research Council for some years, and we have some marvelous research that goes on in New Zealand in the area of medical research. I think it's world class. And yet we share it willingly without bundling it up first. Well, fine, open data, open source, good idea to share stuff. But if we don't even bundle it up so we know what we're sharing, we lose the negotiability to ensure that we get back exactly what we should be getting back for what we're giving out. And I don't feel we're doing that. And I think it's left us very unprotected and unsafe.
Okay. Thank you for that. Keitha, I'll ask you the same question.
Right. Well, two answers here. Just looking initially at the Open Data Program, it's very concerning that the funding comes to an end on 30 June this year. So I think that it has to continue to make friends and make new friends. And there's some great opportunities at the moment at the very high strategic level. And I'd just like to recognise the Hamilton City Council work. That strategic approach is excellent. Let's look to that at the broader cross-government level. The legislation, the draft public sector reform legislation, has open government as a principle. So just cosy up to the SSC and see how that can be used to formalise and embed the Open Data Program in the new unified public service, which is the way it's been described by the State Services Commissioner. And then the digital strategy for the public service, to my horror, when I read it last night, does not mention the words open data, but it does have opportunities in its foundation work. So open data is a foundation for the digital strategy and for open government. So cozy up to the Chief Government Digital Officer and get that work into that program. So that's the higher level. And the stories, I'd just like to support the importance of stories to explain why we do this. I mean, people say, why is it so important? And, we, and I was guilty of, used big weasel words about improving transparency and better economic benefits, etc. Explain them and give examples. There's heaps of examples of how the data has been used, but that's no longer known. And this work has to become business as usual, so we have to explain it. And the OECD, in that very same report we've heard about, said that the value of reuse of public sector data ranged from 0.1 to 1.5% of GDP. Well, let's tell everybody. Let's explain how that's happened. And those Hamilton stories are terribly indicative of what we should be doing. So, flaunt our success. And those of you from agencies, flaunt your success, and across government itself, let's do that more widely.
Yeah, and you can visualize dollar signs, as Suzanne said, so that makes a very good story.
Alice, could I just give one more dollar sign one?
Yes.
And that is that, sorry about this, everyone, but based on, following on from what Keith has just said and Carlos this morning, or earlier today, over 40% of government expenditure is through procurement. Our roads, our bridges, all those things basically are done through procurement policies, and yet we haven't to date got the kind of open data that we should have, just about a basic part of how government spends our taxpayer funds. If we had that, again, the sort of things that we'd be able to do to make progress on, we'd be better able to understand, for example, how to build better bridges more effectively and more efficiently, how to build better school buildings, and so on.
Mm-hmm. And just finish that, Colombia is doing much better than us in open procurement. Well done, Colombia.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned taxpayer funds. Well, data is a taxpayer resource as well. And it's something about changing the mindset. It's not just about the dollars, but it's about the data.
Maybe I can just comment. New Zealand government procurement is one of the many functions that sits within NB alongside the company's office. It's great to have some of my colleagues here with us today. We've been making really solid progress, and I want to celebrate that. So open procurement is commitment 12 in the Open Government Partnership Action Plan, as I'm sure you all know because you've read it, and you've memorised it, and you look at it regularly. Those kind of commitments are powerful. They drive change in the public service, and that does sit close to the State Services Commissioner, to the centre, and has an international monitoring mechanism sitting next to me here. Those things, we take them very seriously. And we've just published our first release of procurement data from the Government Electronic Tender System, GETS. That went live in October last year, 9 months ahead of the target in the action plan. Our second release came out in January, and we've got a program of improvements that are coming next, and some great partners who are keeping us honest as we go on that journey. Another piece of great news from MB is that we've just published our first release of bulk data from the Companies Office on data.gov.nz in November 2019, looking to our hero in the back there. Companies Office have been putting an immense amount of work into their data, quite similar to the process that we saw from Hamilton Council. Thank you, Chris. So going through modelling, and with that modelling, looking at what is it that stops us from releasing, when we talk about privacy, which particular bits are we worried about, and what could we release comprehensively? So excellent progress on that front. Get in there, use it, tell us what you want next.
And that was your call to action. Let us know what you want.
Yeah, in the immortal words of the Spice Girls, tell me what you want, what you really, really want. If you're a keen advocate, get it into the Open Government Partnership Action Plan. The next one's being developed this year. Really embed things in those commitments. We're here working in government focused on the spirit of service. So for us, it's about what's going to make the most difference to New Zealand and New Zealanders. We need a wide voice from all different parts of society so that we can choose the right things to invest in. We don't want to just go across the board, choose something that's actually not that important. We'd like to do the thing that's going to make the most difference for the country. So share your stories, share your demands, use the connections that you're making, including today. Come and have a chat with me afterwards if there's something in particular that you'd like to see NB doing next.
Okay, thank you, Evelyn. And Emma, we'll end it with you. What is your call to action? What would you like to see happen next?
I'd like to see people embracing that if they don't know quite what to do with their data yet, at least start getting it ready. That will never be a waste of time and resources. It can take considerable time to clean data, to run through some algorithms or models, and often it can be 70, 80% of the work. But just because you don't know where you're going to go with the use, you haven't translated that perhaps across, there's plenty of work to be doing, and that will only speed up opportunities to really gain from that data when ready to share. And really to ensure that people like Paul and the team with open data can continue such great work and can continue to provide mechanisms and guidance for all of us to be able to share safely, which, it unlocks so much of our future.
Yeah. Thank you. Lovely note to end on, because I'm afraid we have run out of time for the panel. Thank you so much to all of these women. And might I point out, International Women's Day is being celebrated today, so I think this is highly appropriate. Yes. Thank you for your wisdom and expertise and your time. I certainly appreciate it. And you may let me start that again. Make your way back to your seats. It is a Friday afternoon. My mouth is stopping a little early. It is 3 o'clock. We are going to start tea in just a moment. And I will let you start having the conversation. However, as they're getting a little gift, I am going to say that while the standalone Open Government Data Program does come to an end in June of this year, it is clear that the work to embrace it has not yet finished. The risk is, of course, that if the push to open data loses visibility, starts to drop off the radar, so to speak, New Zealand will slide further down in the rankings. The positive that we can reinforce is that we have a flourishing civil society. We have a commitment on the part of people like Evelyn at MB. And we have competition now through Colombia and other countries that were mentioned here today. Others are making longer strides. They are in some ways outshining. However, this is an opportunity to keep our eyes on the prize, not to be risk averse, to be bold instead, and maybe New Zealand can once again leapfrog ahead. The opportunities really do remain promising. And what we didn't have time to delve into is something that Carlos and Emma and I had talked about, which is data is the new gold. We can create new businesses from open data, but we'll only know what kind of business after it's open. And then we find out. It's sort of that chicken or egg scenario. So the challenge I pose to you today is, how will you keep the momentum going after hearing these case studies, after hearing this advice, after seeing the templates? The first step is to go and have a meet and greet in the tea room outside. And the challenge is to talk to 3 people you don't know and start sharing your stories instead of just gravitating to the faces you recognize. Now, Paul Stone met Deb Lemon at a meetup in Christchurch, and look at where that has led, to shining a bright, big spotlight on all the work that Deb has committed her time, energy, and personal money towards supporting. I think at this point, by the way, we've mentioned Paul a couple times, I would like to pause and thank Paul Stone with Stats NZ for all the work that you and your team have done behind the stewardship framework. And I know that you may have a few words about trying to keep one of our most valuable resources open and visible and on the radar. So I'll give you a chance to say a few words before I send everyone off toward the tea room.
What I actually wanted to do was say thank you very much. So firstly, Palace for doing a great job being the glue for this afternoon, and a very grateful thank you to our speakers that have shared and hopefully inspired, and a very warm thank you to you all for coming and making the time. Data-wise, can't go through this without having some statistics. We have about 58% government and 42% non-government organisation or attendees in the audience, so it's a great mix. I think we have 67 government agencies, 67 private organisations and 52, I think it was, government agencies. So a great spread. So our aim has been to reach far corners. But I'd actually like to particularly thank the non-government attendees that have come in their own time, because I know for some of you it's at a cost, and we really, really appreciate that, and we appreciate your commitment and support to open data. So thank you all, and have a great time connecting and talking to each other over afternoon tea.
So storytelling, another theme for today. It needs to continue. What you've heard today, start building on the learnings, what you've heard, and then actually start talking to other people. You know, people like me who don't work in this space. There are people out there you can convert and who can help you evangelize. Tell your stories. People need to want open data, and we want to use open data, but we need to know what open data is first. So don't feel that you're boring people when you start to talk about it, because these are the people who will help spread this idea, this concept, and help you keep the momentum going. Because out there is where the magic happens. Again, that magic wand idea. It's not so very far-fetched. It's about articulating what you want clearly, speaking up, standing up, making it happen. You know, just dispense with the small talk. Ask the burning questions, because we just don't have time. We really need to keep this going. Keep asking, keep talking until you see the change that you want, until people start listening. Thank you all for being here today, for supporting this initiative, and for being open data champions. After all, behind the data and all the numbers, it is the people. Ki mai ki ahau, he aa te mea nui o te ao, maku e ki atu, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. No reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.